There is a specific moment that happens without announcement. You're speaking to someone about your weekend, your plans, your day, and the word slips out. My baby needs me. My child is sick. I can't leave them alone. And you're talking about your dog, your cat, the animal you share your home with. The word arrives so naturally that you don't even notice it until you see the look on their face, that slight pause, that microscopic shift in their expression. The judgment hasn't formed into words yet, but it's already there, hanging in the air between you. Have you felt that moment, that instant where you realize you've revealed something you were supposed to keep hidden? If you've experienced this, drop it in the comments. And if you want to explore the psychology beneath moments like these, consider subscribing, because what we're about to uncover goes deeper than language. Let's begin. Have you ever found yourself defending a choice you didn't think needed defending? You stayed home on a Friday night because your dog was anxious. You rearranged your entire work schedule around a vet appointment. You spent $200 on emergency care without hesitation, the kind of money you'd agonize over spending on yourself. And when you mentioned it casually to a friend, to a co-worker, to family, you saw it. That look. The one that says you're overreacting, the one that suggests you've lost perspective, the one that quietly, politely, devastatingly implies that you care too much about something that doesn't deserve this level of care. Perhaps they didn't say it directly. Perhaps they just smiled and changed the subject. Or maybe they did say it. It's just a pet. You know it's not actually your child, right? You're treating an animal like a person. And something inside you tightened. Not because you doubted yourself, but because you knew they were wrong, and yet you couldn't explain why, in a way that wouldn't make you sound exactly like what they were accusing you of being. Unstable, lonely, compensating for something missing. You've cried harder at the thought of losing your pet than you've cried about some human relationships. You've felt a rush of protective instinct so fierce, it startled you. You've used the language of parenthood without thinking, without deciding to, because it simply emerged as the most accurate description of what you feel. You are not confused about what your pet is. You know the difference between a human child and an animal. You're not delusional. You're not projecting. You're not broken. And yet, the world keeps telling you that this bond shouldn't feel this way. That if it does, something is wrong with you. That real love, legitimate attachment, proper family, these things only count when they fit into very specific categories. A romantic partner, a biological child, maybe a sibling or parent, if the relationship meets certain standards. But a pet, that's supposed to be companionship, affection, sure, even deep affection. But not this. Not the feeling that you would do anything, sacrifice anything, restructure your entire life to protect this being who depends on you completely. Maybe you've started to hide it. You downplay how much you spend on them. You laugh awkwardly when you realize you've filled your phone with their photos. You stop mentioning them in conversation unless someone asks directly, because you've learned that your enthusiasm makes people uncomfortable. You've learned that grief over a pet is given 3 days, maybe a week, before people expect you to move on. You've learned that "I'm a dog mum" or "I'm a cat dad," said without irony, marks you as someone who doesn't understand real responsibility. And the cruelest part, you've started to wonder if they're right. If maybe you are making too much of this. If maybe the intensity of your attachment means something is wrong with it. Your ability to form proper human connections. If maybe you're using this relationship to avoid something, to hide from something, to compensate for something you lack. But what if I told you that everything you've been taught about this bond is backwards? That the language of parenthood emerges not because you're confused, but because your nervous system recognizes something most people don't understand. That attachment theory, the science of how humans bond, has known for decades that the parent-child dynamic can form in ways that have nothing to do with biology and everything to do with specific psychological needs that some people arrive at adulthood still carrying. What if the shame you feel isn't about your relationship with your pet at all, but about a culture that has forgotten what attachment actually is, how it actually works, and why some people need what they need? The answer to why you feel what you feel doesn't lie in pathology. It lies in something far more profound and far more human than anyone has told you. Your brain doesn't care about semantics. It doesn't respond to social conventions or cultural definitions of what counts as family. Your brain responds to patterns, to behavioral cues, to the presence or absence of specific interactions that signal safety, that signal attachment, that signal home. And when those patterns appear, your nervous system activates systems that have existed in mammals for millions of years, systems that don't distinguish between the biological and the chosen, between the human and the non-human. They only recognize the shape of the bond itself. Attachment theory, developed over decades of research into how humans connect, identified something crucial that most people still don't understand. We don't just need connection in general. We need specific types of bonds. The attachment between friends operates differently than the attachment between romantic partners. The bond with a mentor feels different than the bond with a sibling. And the parent-child bond, whether you're the parent or the child in that dynamic, has its own distinct architecture. It's characterized by a few unmistakable features. Unconditional acceptance. A protective instinct that overrides self-interest. Hierarchical caregiving where one being's needs come first without resentment. Physical affection without ambiguity. Routine and ritual that create a sense of stability, and perhaps most importantly, a felt sense of responsibility that doesn't deplete you because it gives you purpose. Some people move through life collecting these bonds naturally. They had parents who provided secure attachment in childhood. They form romantic partnerships that feel safe. If they want children, they have them. Their attachment needs are met through conventional channels, and they never have to think about the machinery underneath. But others arrive at adulthood carrying something unfinished. Maybe their parents were physically present, but emotionally absent, providing care, without warmth, obligation, without attunement. Maybe they were parentified as children, forced to care for siblings or even their own parents, giving caregiving without ever receiving it themselves. Maybe they experienced love that came with conditions, with strings, with the constant fear that one wrong move would sever the connection entirely. Or maybe they simply have caregiving instincts that run deep, people who feel most alive when nurturing something, who have profound capacity for the parent role, but have chosen not to take it with human children for reasons that are entirely their own. These people reach adulthood with their attachment system still searching, not consciously, not desperately, but quietly, constantly. The way your body searches for equilibrium when something is out of balance. And then they encounter a pet, and something clicks into place that they didn't even realize was misaligned. The pet needs them in a way that is pure, uncomplicated, total. The pet doesn't judge their worthiness, doesn't withdraw affection as punishment, doesn't require them to be anything other than present. The communication is non-verbal, which means it bypasses all the places where words have failed them before. The pet doesn't lie, doesn't manipulate, doesn't pretend. And in caring for this being, feeding them at the same time each day, noticing the subtle shifts in behavior that signal discomfort or illness, feeling their body relax against yours, seeing their excitement when you return, the caregiving system activates fully, perhaps for the first time in their life. Your brain releases oxytocin when you make eye contact with your pet, the same hormone that floods a mother's system when she nurses her infant. Your cortisol levels drop in their presence. Your heart rate variability improves, a marker of nervous system regulation. The neural pathways associated with attachment light up on brain scans identically, whether you're looking at your child or your dog. This isn't metaphor. This isn't you imagining things or being overly sentimental. This is your brain recognizing the behavioral signature of a primary attachment bond and responding accordingly. The bond you feel is as real as any bond you've ever formed, because the systems that create bonds don't operate on the level of language or social acceptability. They operate on the level of survival, of nervous system regulation, of what makes you feel safe enough to exist in the world. The pet provides the key that fits a lock you've been carrying, not because they're replacing something, but because they're offering something that was never provided in the first place. And your system, wise and adaptive and relentlessly oriented toward healing, recognizes the opportunity and takes it. But this bond doesn't form randomly. It doesn't happen to everyone who owns a pet. You can have two people with the same breed of dog living in similar circumstances, and one will feel companionship while the other will feel something that registers in their chest as parenthood. So who are the people for whom this transformation occurs? What distinguishes them? What are they carrying that makes a pet become not just an animal they care for, but a being they would protect with the same ferocity they'd protect a child? There is a particular kind of person who forms these bonds, and their story often begins long before the pet enters their life. It begins in childhood, in moments that seemed small at the time, but left marks that never fully healed. For some, it starts with parents who provided the basics: food, shelter, safety, but withheld emotional warmth. They grew up in homes where love was implied but never spoken, never shown through touch or attentive presence. They learned early that their feelings were inconvenient, that expressing need was met with impatience or dismissal. They became experts at reading the emotional temperature of a room, at making themselves small, at not asking for too much. And they reached adulthood believing this was normal, that everyone felt this underlying hum of emptiness, this sense that something fundamental was missing, but they couldn't name what. For others, the story is different, but the outcome is the same. They were the ones who raised their younger siblings because their parents couldn't or wouldn't. They learned to give care before they learned to receive it. They knew how to soothe a crying child at 8 years old, how to pack lunches and check homework and provide the stability that should have been given to them. They became parents before they were even adolescents, and the caregiving system in their brain activated early and ran constantly, searching for an outlet, for a purpose, for someone who needed them the way they once needed to be needed. Some people in this group experienced love that came with rules. They were praised when they achieved, ignored when they struggled. Affection was a reward for good behavior, withdrawn as punishment for mistakes. They learned that connection was conditional, that they had to earn the right to be cared about, that one failure could mean abandonment. They grew up vigilant, always monitoring, always performing, always terrified of the moment when they would inevitably fall short and lose everything. And they carried that fear into adulthood, into relationships where they couldn't fully relax because they were always waiting for the other person to leave. Then there are those who find human relationships exhausting in ways they can't fully explain to others. Maybe they're highly sensitive, picking up on every shift in tone until social interaction feels overwhelming. Maybe they're neurodivergent, constantly translating between their internals, experience, and what others expect. Maybe they've been betrayed enough times that trust feels like a risk they're no longer willing to take. Or maybe they've looked at the option of having human children and chosen against it for deeply personal reasons, but the caregiving drive remains, powerful and persistent, needing somewhere to go. All of these people share something crucial. They have enormous capacity for attachment, for devotion, for the kind of fierce, protective love that reorganizes a life around another being's needs. But they've been hurt in the places where that capacity should have been received and reciprocated. They've learned that offering this part of themselves to humans often leads to pain, to misunderstanding, to having their care taken for granted or used against them. And then they meet a pet, and the pet offers something that feels impossible in the human world. The pet needs them without pretense, responds to care without calculation, offers affection that isn't contingent on performance, and for the first time, possibly ever, they feel safe enough to let the full force of their caregiving instinct emerge without fear of it being weaponized or wasted. This isn't compensation for a deficit. This is adaptation. This is survival. This is someone who refused to let a broken world break their capacity to love and found a way to express that capacity where it could finally be received safely. Now that you understand who forms these bonds and why, we need to explore what happens inside the relationship itself. Because what looks from the outside like someone who has confused a pet with a child is actually something far more complex and far more powerful. This bond isn't just emotional comfort. It's not just companionship with extra intensity. It's performing specific psychological functions that reshape how a person experiences safety, identity, and their own capacity to exist in the world. And most people never see this happening because they're looking at the surface behavior instead of the internal transformation occurring beneath it. The first thing the bond does is regulate your nervous system in ways that most human relationships cannot. When you're with your pet, your body shifts into a state that researchers call co-regulation. Your breathing slows to match theirs. Your heart rate synchronizes. The presence of their body against yours sends signals to your vagus nerve that you are safe, that you can stop monitoring for threats, that you can finally rest. This isn't something you decide to do. It happens automatically the way your pupils dilate in darkness. And for someone whose nervous system has been stuck in vigilance mode for years, for someone who learned early that the world is unpredictable and people are dangerous, this physiological shift is nothing short of miraculous. The pet becomes what attachment theory calls a secure base, the safe harbor you return to when the world becomes too much. But it goes deeper than regulation. The bond creates identity in a way that might be the first time this person has felt genuinely needed, not needed in the way a boss needs an employee, which is conditional and transactional, not needed in the way a romantic partner needs you, which often comes tangled with expectations and disappointments. Needed in the pure sense that this being depends on you for survival, and that dependency doesn't diminish you. It expands you. Suddenly, you have structure. You wake up at the same time because they need to be fed. You come home because they're waiting. You make decisions: where to live, what job to take, how to spend your money, with their needs as a primary factor. And instead of this feeling like a burden, it feels like the first time your life has had clear purpose. You know what you're for. You know why you matter. The bond also becomes a safe container for vulnerability that may have had nowhere else to go. You talk to your pet in ways you would never talk to another human. You tell them about your day, your fears, your failures. You cry into their fur when something breaks inside you. And they don't offer advice or try to fix you or minimize what you're feeling. They simply stay. They press closer. They offer the kind of witness that asks nothing in return except that you continue existing. This isn't one-sided projection. This is you finally having a relationship where emotional ceasing. Honesty doesn't result in punishment or abandonment. And here's what most people miss entirely. In caring for your pet, in learning to read their subtle signals, in noticing when they're uncomfortable before they show obvious signs, in adjusting your behavior to meet their needs, you are doing something profound. You are giving them what you never received. You are becoming the attentive, responsive, unconditionally present caregiver that you needed and didn't have. And in that process, something remarkable happens. You begin to internalize that caregiving. You start to believe, perhaps for the first time, that you are capable of providing what you once desperately needed. The wound doesn't disappear, but it begins to integrate. You are reparenting yourself through the act of parenting another being. The psychologists call this corrective emotional experience, and it's one of the most powerful mechanisms of healing that exists. Your pet sees you in a way that feels pure. They don't care about your productivity, your appearance, your social status, your past mistakes. They care that you are present, that you are theirs, that you come back. And being seen this way, consistently and without conditions, begins to change how you see yourself. This is where the conversation becomes more delicate, because while everything we've explored so far is true and valid and real, there's another layer that needs to be acknowledged. Not every parental bond with a pet functions the same way. Some of these bonds are profoundly healing, opening a person up to greater capacity for connection and self-understanding. Others, though they feel equally intense, can become a place to hide rather than a place to grow. And the difference between the two isn't always obvious from the inside. It requires a level of self-honesty that can be uncomfortable, even painful. But it's essential, because confusing one for the other can keep you trapped in patterns that feel like safety, but are actually preventing the very healing you're seeking. The first question to ask yourself is whether your pet enhances your life or replaces it. Enhancement means the bond adds richness, depth, purpose to an existence that still includes other forms of connection. You have your pet, and you also have friendships, family relationships that function reasonably well, the ability to engage with the world beyond your home. The pet makes everything better, but they're not the only source of meaning or joy. Replacement is different. It's when the pet becomes the sole recipient of your emotional energy, when human relationships have been abandoned not because they're genuinely toxic, but because they require a vulnerability that feels too risky. It's when you realize that if something happened to your pet, you wouldn't just grieve. You would have no one else, nothing else, to anchor you to the world. The second marker is flexibility versus rigidity. A healthy bond has room for life to happen. You can travel if needed, arranging care without spiraling into panic. You can work, have dinner with a friend, spend a day away from home without your nervous system treating it as an emergency. You miss your pet. You think about them. But you can function. Rigidity shows up differently. It's when you cannot leave your pet even for a few hours without severe anxiety. When the thought of boarding them or having someone else watch them triggers something close to terror. When you've structured your entire life to never be separated, and that structure has started to shrink your world down to the size of your living room. The third distinction is joy versus obligation, driven by fear. Healthy caregiving feels fulfilling even when it's difficult. There's a sense of choice in it, of purpose that energizes rather than depletes. You care for your pet because doing so makes you feel more aligned with who you want to be, but sometimes the caregiving becomes compulsive, driven not by love, but by a terror of what will happen if you're not perfect at it. You check on them obsessively. You catastrophize every small change in behavior. You cannot rest because you're always monitoring, always vigilant, treating their care like a test you might fail at any moment. The bond stops being a source of peace and becomes another arena for your anxiety to run wild. The final question is whether the bond supports your growth or prevents it. Does caring for your pet help you feel more capable, more grounded, more ready to engage with challenges? Or has it become the reason you don't pursue relationships, don't take risks, don't push yourself beyond what feels immediately safe? There's no shame in either answer, but there is a difference. One path uses the bond as a foundation to build from. The other uses it as a wall to hide behind. And here's the complexity that makes this so difficult to untangle. The bond can be absolutely real, deeply healing, and still functioning as avoidance. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. You can genuinely love your pet with the full force of parental attachment and also be using that relationship to avoid the terror of human vulnerability. Both can be true simultaneously. The question isn't whether your love is real. It's whether the shape of that love is serving your healing or preventing it. But here's what makes navigating this bond even more difficult than it already is. The judgment you face from the world isn't really about your pet at all. It's about something much deeper and much older. A cultural anxiety about who gets to define family, who gets to claim the language of love, and what kinds of bonds are considered legitimate enough to be taken seriously. And when you internalize that judgment, when you start policing your own feelings to fit into someone else's narrow definition of acceptable attachment, you lose access to the very thing that was trying to heal you. Society has very specific ideas about what counts as real family: a romantic partner, preferably married, biological children, or adopted children if you follow the approved path. Maybe parents and siblings if those relationships meet certain standards of closeness. But the list is short, and it's rigid, and anything that falls outside these boundaries is treated as lesser, as pretend, as something people do when they can't access the real thing. And this framework isn't neutral. It's a form of social control that has been used throughout history to delegitimize bonds that threatened the established order. Interracial couples were told their love wasn't real family. Same-sex couples were told their partnerships didn't count. Child-free people are still told they can't understand real love or real responsibility. And now, people who form parental bonds with pets are told the same thing, that they're confused, that they're compensating, that if they just tried harder, they could have a real family instead. The mockery is everywhere once you start noticing it. The crazy cat lady trope that paints women who love their cats as pathetic and undesirable. The assumption that if you're this attached to a pet, you must be incapable of human relationships, rather than someone who has chosen where to direct your profound capacity for care. The eye rolls when you mention your pet in conversation. The lack of bereavement leave when your pet dies, as if this loss is somehow less legitimate than other losses. The constant subtle and not so subtle messaging that your bond is embarrassing, excessive, a sign that you need to grow up and join the adult world where people have real responsibilities. And the cruelest part is how this judgment seeps inward. You start to question yourself even when you're alone. You downplay your feelings, even to yourself. You feel embarrassed by the depth of your attachment. You apologize for caring so much, as if your love is something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. You hide your grief when your pet dies, because you've learned that the world will give you 3 days of sympathy before expecting you to move on, as if 13 years of daily companionship and unconditional presence can be processed in a long weekend. You stop using the language that feels true, mother, father, child, baby, and replace it with words that feel safer but less honest. Pet owner, animal lover, as if those clinical terms could possibly capture what you actually experience. This internalized shame creates a devastating double bind. The bond with your pet is healing you, giving you access to attachment patterns you couldn't safely experience anywhere else. But the shame about having that bond creates new wounds, new reasons to feel broken, new evidence that something is wrong with you. You're caught between your lived experience, which tells you this love is real and necessary and transformative, and the culture's story, which tells you this love is a consolation prize for people who couldn't access the real thing. And when you accept the culture's story, even partially, even unconsciously, you cut yourself off from the healing that was trying to happen. You turn the bond itself into another source of pain rather than a source of restoration. The judgment isn't about protecting you or helping you or guiding you towards something better. It's about protecting a very narrow definition of what family is allowed to be. And anyone whose love doesn't fit that definition becomes a threat to the system. So, what do you do with this understanding? How do you hold on to the truth of your bond while navigating a world that doesn't understand it and may never understand it? The answer isn't to convince anyone else. It's not to gather evidence or make your case or prove that your attachment is valid. The answer is to stop asking for permission to feel what you already feel. To stop waiting for the culture to catch up to what your nervous system has already recognized as true. To move from defending your bond to simply living it fully and without apology. This shift begins with language, but it's not really about the words themselves. It's about what the words represent. When you catch yourself hedging, when you say, "my fur baby," with a nervous laugh, or "I know it sounds silly," but before describing how much your pet means to you, notice that moment. Notice the impulse to soften your truth, to make it more palatable for others, and then make a different choice. Not aggressively, not defensively, just clearly. "This is my child. This is my family." Said the same way you would state any other fact about your life, without justification, without apology, without the performance of self-awareness that signals you know this is weird and you're in on the joke. Because it's not weird, and it's not a joke, and you don't owe anyone a disclaimer before you speak your truth. The shift also requires you to stop absorbing other people's discomfort as evidence that you're doing something wrong. When someone gives you that look, that subtle expression of judgment or confusion or pity, recognize what's actually happening. Their discomfort isn't about you, it's about the limitations of their own understanding, their own capacity to imagine bonds that fall outside their experience. They cannot see what you see because they haven't lived what you've lived. They haven't felt their nervous system finally regulate in the presence of another being. They haven't experienced the specific healing that comes from being needed in this particular way. Their inability to understand doesn't make your experience less real. It just means they're operating with a map that doesn't include the territory you're navigating. This is where you reclaim the bond from shame and place it back where it belongs, in the category of profound human experiences that don't require external validation to be true. You hold both truths without contradiction. Yes, this is a pet, an animal, a dog, a cat, a creature that is not human. And yes, this is also a parental bond, an attachment relationship. A being whose needs you prioritize, whose presence regulates you, whose loss would devastate you in ways that are indistinguishable from losing a child. These facts don't cancel each other out. They coexist. And your ability to hold that complexity is a sign of psychological sophistication, not confusion. The world will tell you this bond is less than, that it's practice for the real thing, or compensation for what you couldn't have, or evidence of your inability to form proper human attachments. But your nervous system tells you otherwise. And your nervous system, which has kept you alive through everything that tried to break you, which found a way to seek healing even when you didn't consciously know you needed it, which recognized safety in a form the culture doesn't acknowledge, your nervous system has never lied to you. The bond you feel is the bond that exists. The love you experience is as real as any love that has ever been felt. And forming a parental attachment with a pet isn't a failure to bond with humans. It's evidence of your capacity for profound connection, despite everything that gave you reasons not to trust, not to open, not to risk caring that deeply ever again. We've explored how certain bonds form not from deficit, but from a deep capacity to attach even after the world has given you reasons not to. We've seen how pets can become true attachment figures, how that bond serves real psychological functions, and how societal judgment tries to invalidate what your own experience knows to be true. Take a moment to notice where you still apologize for this bond, where you still downplay it, even to yourself. What should we explore next in the psychology of attachment and love? Drop your ideas below. If you found this valuable, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the emotional landscapes we rarely discuss. Your bonds are yours to define. No one else gets to tell you what counts.